Welcome to Uncovered. It's Wednesday. I'm Anthony, he's Ron, and together we're about to uncover the MAGA propaganda that is not covered by the mainstream and corporate media. Ron, we have so much to talk about. Of course, Donald Trump finally made it to Davos after his 30-year-old 747 crapped out on him and he had to deplane. Before we get to Davos, let's just talk about the presser that he gave yesterday. This was his kind of 1-year anniversary presser where he kind of tried to proclaim his great successes. Before I show a couple of clips, because I mean, it was completely deranged. It went on way too long and it really exposed a level of decline in his mental and cognitive abilities. Is that the feeling you got from it?
Yeah, it really is interesting to watch some of the Republicans, you know, even the MAGA followers, the right-wing talk show hosts, the podcasters' reaction to a lot of his most recent events, because even they are like, something's wrong, you know, or, you know, and they're trying to make excuses for him. But I think that those of us who have covered Trump closely have seen the steady circling the drain downward spiral. But I think the general American public is seeing it now a lot more. The disaster with this particular thing was this press conference was supposed to be to celebrate his 1-year anniversary of being president, right? So the problem is he had no speech. And this is the problem. What we know who cover him closely is when he sticks to the teleprompter, which he does sometimes, then he can do reasonably well with some minor gaffes. It's whenever he goes off script and starts riffing that he gets himself in trouble and says crazy stuff. This time he had no speech, no teleprompter. So he went out there and he stood there for 2 hours behind the podium, and it was just a complete disaster because he didn't have any kind of speech as a framework to sort of keep him focused. So he ended up just rambling, going off on tangents. It was just a cognitive messy, soupy disaster.
He started off with this Nobel Prize drivel, which he kind of continues, despite the fact that he's now been given one indirectly. Isn't it interesting how the criminals will always get the loot somehow, even illegitimately, but he is still going on about it. And I think he's got this caveat now where he claims that he saved millions and millions of lives with these so-called 8 wars, which he 100% has not saved or ended. And I was thinking that he's almost projecting that he saved millions of lives because in the back of his mind, he knows that he's killed millions of people and that in the future, this will maybe help him in his Hague trial or something. Let's take a look at him kind of backtracking. Here he is.
Well, should have gotten the Nobel Prize for each war, but I don't say that. I saved millions and millions of people. And don't let anyone tell you that Norway doesn't control the shots, okay? It's in Norway. Norway controls the shots. They'll say, we have nothing to do with it. It's a joke. They've lost such prestige. That's why I have such respect for Maria doing what she did. She said, I don't deserve the Nobel Prize. He does. When she got it, they said, wow, that's amazing. I thought President Trump would get it. President Trump does.
Yeah, it's just bonkers.
You know, she's in a position where she is in exile and, you know, the person that she was opposing has been removed from power. So, you know, I think she's saying what she thought would work. You know, let's be clear. If she wasn't in this position, she wouldn't be giving him her medal. She wouldn't be saying he deserved it. She's doing what all the Republicans do here in the United States who are trying to get his endorsement or stay on his good side, which is, you know, constantly massaging his fragile ego. And that's what she's been doing. Now, by the way, I don't think she's an especially good person. I think that she is not only weak, but I don't think she deserved the prize at all. I mean, she was out there today talking about we need to invade Cuba and we need to invade Colombia and all this. So I get that, like, she got it for opposing Maduro, who's a piece of garbage, but I'm not so sure that she is the answer here for the people of Venezuela. But the bottom line is this: Trump's not going to put her in power anyway. And that's why I continue, she's still running around the United States talking about how Trump needs to do this, Trump needs to do that. And it's like every single time Trump gets asked about Venezuela, are you going to hold an election? Oh, no. We're not really worried about that right now. Are you worried about human rights? Are you worried about political prisoners in Venezuela? No, Trump's not concerned about any of that. The only thing he talks about is the oil, seizing their oil, selling it on the international market, and keeping the money for himself or to distribute however he sees fit. So it's kind of comical when her and the Republican congressman from South Florida and Rick Scott continue day after day to run around talking about what Trump needs to do in Venezuela when he has no intention of doing anything in Venezuela other than stealing their oil.
The other thing worth mentioning is that the way he talks about that Norway is the one that controls the prize, because it's obviously not Norway. It's an external committee, as we know, the Nobel Committee. But this is, I actually wrote a Substack all about this a couple of nights ago. He is projecting the level of corruption that he expects from every government, because that's how he runs his. So he presumes that the Norwegian government should be able to manipulate the recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize, because that's what he would do if his country was issuing a prize. And that really kind of it really exposes where his head is at when it comes to the legitimacy of not just this prize, but anything of this realm. So,
it was interesting to see the Europeans' reaction to his most recent threat, which is to impose a 25% tariff on any European country that is backing Denmark continuing to have sovereignty over Greenland. And I think that really rattled them, because they felt like they had gone through months and months of negotiations. Von der Leyen negotiates this quote unquote trade deal, which is very wishy-washy. And, they thought that they had a deal. She thought she had a deal. In fact, her response to Trump's latest threat was, a deal's a deal. We signed a deal. You can't go back on the deal. And it's like, they still don't get it, do they? They
don't know him. Yeah.
A deal is not a deal with Donald Trump. A deal is only a deal as long as he decides it's a deal. But the second he decides he doesn't want to go along with the deal that he just signed, that's it. And so, it's been really interesting, because they appear to have been very upset this time about this particular threat to undo the trade deal. I read this morning, I think that, of course, this new threat is supposed to take effect February 1st. So we still have 10 days for Trump to go back on it. And as we know, 95% of the time, these threats never happen. He's just making the threat. But Europe has already said, if on February 1st he imposes these additional tariffs, our trade deal with the United States is off. The other thing that is interesting now is some Europeans, not necessarily prime ministers, but opposition party leaders in various European countries, are starting to suggest two things that could hurt the United States very badly. One more badly than the other. One is the fact that Europe holds collectively about 10% of our national debt. They own our treasury bonds. So if they started selling them off, as, by the way, Denmark is now doing and Sweden has just done, they start selling off our bonds, that is going to tank our economy. It is going to drive up interest rates. It is going to drive up mortgage rates. If all of the European countries decided to sell off the debt that they hold, our economy will be in a depression. So that is a extremely powerful lever that none of the people in power have actually threatened so far, except for a couple small countries. But if they do, that could be a very effective weapon. We don't hold Europe's debt. Europe holds our debt. So it's a one-way street here. The other thing is the World Cup. increasingly you are hearing more and more people, including very serious World Cup fans. Piers Morgan said this the other day, who's about as hardcore of a soccer fan as you can get, about boycotting the World Cup, not coming, not just the fans, the teams themselves, or trying to move it at the last minute. So, I mean, I don't know if that's a serious threat, but I'm hearing it. I'm reading it more and more from members of parliament in various European countries.
Yeah. I've been predicting this for a while and saying out loud that the World Cup and the Los Angeles Olympics as well, how are teams going to get accredited teams going to get visas to even enter the country if they don't get picked up on their night off by ICE? I mean, it's a terrifying prospect. And then, of course, you've got the fans. Who's going to want to come to the US to actually watch these things and buy tickets? The knock-on effect is huge. And I'm sure that, when he plans to ethnically cleanse America using a kind of private paramilitary force, he wasn't really thinking about the World Cup at the time. But, these things should be considered. Let's just go back to his cognitive decline. We've often spoken about the fact that he has very little interest in anything other than he's kind of directly affected things like the ballroom and the Arc de Triomphe and things that he's kind of directly proud of, ending 8 wars, so-called. I was watching this presser yesterday, seeing him kind of looking for any distraction. And I'm talking specifically now about this bulldog clip that was on the top of his notes that nearly kind of caught his finger. He then decided to riff on this, and like a stand-up comedian who's run out of material in a kind of local club, where he starts like picking on the audience and just like doing a routine. Now, if you don't have much knowledge of dementia, or if you've never seen family members kind of sundowning and this type of stuff, you might just think that it's a bit of a joke, but this is very dangerous. The fact that he is so distracted that he's able to then go off on a tangent about a paperclip. Let's take a look.
The book on accomplishments, and this is something. Oh, I'm glad my finger wasn't in that sucker. That could have done some damage, but you know what? I wouldn't have shown the pain. I would have gone back. What, did you hear that? That was nasty. But I would not have shown the pain. I would have acted like nothing happened as my finger fell off. That was a nasty. I think somebody did that. I think it was him. It was my man. How were you? You didn't do it. I know you did. I know you didn't. So,
yeah. I mean, just for the people watching, people laughing are not the press corps, the legitimate press corps. He's got his own staffers in there that are laughing, and the right wing media people are laughing. It's not your mainstream journalists, so don't get mad thinking that that's them. But it's interesting where he went with this, because you're right. I mean, that's a good analogy. A good stand-up comic. I remember seeing Tom Arnold years ago, who was married to Roseanne Barr, and he had no material. He showed up at a comedy club. He had no jokes written, nothing, and he just stood up there and just kind of riffed off things he noticed in the audience. And it was an amazing show. I was just blown away that he was able to do that. And I think a lot of great comics can do that. But Trump is not a great comic, So, but you're right. I think that's what he was trying to do. He was trying to like be funny over that kind of an incident. But I thought it was interesting talking about, I would have not shown any pain. Well, first of all, keep in mind, this is a guy who had like a diaper on his ear for a month, when he allegedly got nicked or something, maybe. But this is a guy who, when he gaffes on a speech, when he makes a mistake, or when he reads something wrong and he realizes he makes a mistake, he never admits it. He never says, "Oh, sorry, I meant no, not this. I meant that." Never. He always just plows forward and acts like nothing happened, and acts like, "Oh, I meant to say that word." And so that was part of it, but also his obsession with trying to project that he's this tough alpha male guy. This is a guy who, avoided military service by faking that he had a foot injury. And now he's trying to like convince the American public, I'm a tough guy. I wouldn't have cried if I caught my finger in a binder clip. I mean, it's just on so many levels. as with all these Trump clips, you could spend hours just on, one sentence. It's just insane.
It's further proof of his inability to keep thoughts inside his head. And I think that is obviously a problem when you're talking about the most powerful man in the world, the man who could end the world if he chose to, and the fact that it seems that he's unable to hold on to a thought without it going via his mouth. And we've seen this with these text messages that he received from Emmanuel Macron and the NATO head, where he, instead of keeping them private, he shared them. And again, this is something that you wouldn't expect from a president of the United States when he's communicated with privately and directly from other heads of state and dignitaries, that he would, use these back channels appropriately. But posting Macron's text is obviously very embarrassing, isn't it? That Macron's trying to bring him back around over his threats towards Greenland. He actually said, with regards to Greenland, I don't understand what you're doing in Greenland. But he also did the same with Mark Rutte as well. And he actually posted it and said, thank you to Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, who was buttering him up about his accomplishments in Syria, effectively, giving him a shit sandwich, because he obviously needed to deal with Greenland. Why do you think he's posting these? Is it because he just loves the fact that people are showing him attention and wants to share that? Or is there a strategy here?
Yeah, I think it's both. I think there was some strategy, in fact, that he was about ready to fly to Davos in 48 hours, and all hell had just broken loose over his threat to impose tariffs. He knows that they're all going to be giving their speeches in Davos the day before he arrives, which was yesterday. So I think what he was doing there is he released these text messages from these European leaders praising him, who are saying, what a wonderful person he is and all of that. When, we know that they don't really think those things. They're just trying to, again, butter him up. This is how, unfortunately, here's what I'll say. The Europeans continue to approach Donald Trump with a playbook that is based off Donald Trump term one. And they have their personality profile of how they think they need to handle him, which is based off that. The problem is that playbook is out of date. It's like a football coach using plays from 3 years ago. They don't work anymore. The other teams figured it out. Trump is not the same person. This is not the same administration from term one. And so they're continuing to think, well, I'll just flatter him, praise him, kiss his ass, and he'll do what we want. When I think now, after a year, it's starting to sink in for many of them that that is not the case. That is simply not the case. And leaking private text messages is something that is just not done between world leaders. Nobody does this. I'm sure they have many messages from him that they could put out. It's just not done. But I think it was done by him to sort of let them know, hey, you better not go too hard on me with your speeches at summit, because I've got all these text messages from you guys praising me. And here's a few of them I'm about to release now, but I've got a lot more. And, I thought it was interesting that the speeches that they gave were the same typical speeches with maybe a little bit more criticism, but not much. And then Mark Carney, the Canadian PM, got up and gave an absolutely brilliant speech, which he wrote himself, according to Canadian officials. Very thoughtful, intelligent, historical speech, and went right at Trump directly without ever mentioning his name, but everybody knew who he was talking about. And his speech brought the house down. His speech got a standing ovation, and you don't get standing ovations at Davos, but he did. And Trump was all pissed off about the speech today and was ripping Carney. But, hopefully what Carney did a little bit there is wake up and shame a little bit some of the European leaders who have been trying to appease Trump. And basically the thrust of his speech was, this is entirely the wrong approach, and we need to stop it right now.
Mark Carney is a kind of rising star of world politics, isn't he? He's really taking the reins where America has fallen. And we should remind people that for all of Donald Trump's posturing about how we are respected again, the US is being treated now as a kind of pariah state in a way. Mark Carney has kind of stepped up, representing North America, obviously Canada, but also NATO. And I think that this is something that we'll see when we look at Trump's Davos speech in a minute. But Trump always refers to NATO as if it is somewhere else, like it is something else, like it has nothing to do with him. And, you know, the US is the largest part of NATO. The US is Trump is NATO, but he talks as if NATO is this other thing. And that's what is so concerning, I think, for other European allies, is that Trump has never really got his head around the fact that NATO is America. It's crazy. Let's take a look at Mark Carney kind of holding court, as you say, delivering a very powerful speech at the Davos Economic Forum.
We knew the story of the international rules-based order was partially false, that the strongest would exempt themselves when convenient, that trade rules were enforced asymmetrically. And we knew that international law applied with varying rigor depending on the identity of the accused or the victim. This fiction was useful, and American hegemony in particular helped provide public goods, open sea lanes, a stable financial system, collective security, and support for frameworks for resolving disputes. So we placed the sign in the window. We participated in the rituals, and we largely avoided calling out the gaps between rhetoric and reality. This bargain no longer works. Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. Over the past 2 decades, a series of crises in finance, health, energy, and geopolitics have laid bare the risks of extreme global integration. But more recently, great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons. Tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. You cannot live within the lie of mutual benefit through integration when integration becomes the source of your subordination.
I get the sense, I think Ron stepped away for a second, so let me kind of continue as a solo, but I get the sense that there is an increasing awareness from NATO. Obviously, this is Davos, so it has a larger reach than NATO. But there is an increasing awareness that Trump is a clear and present danger to the future of not just the transatlantic alliance, but world peace. Carney was really the first of the world leaders to not be frightened of Trump, not to feel the need to butter him up, to actually kind of come out and say it. Didn't mention his name directly, but to all intents and purposes was warning other nations about how erratic and potentially dangerous Donald Trump is.
I think that's what's going to start happening. I read a lot of UK media yesterday, and Keir Starmer was getting roasted by the British press for cozying up to Trump. And I think that is going to happen around Europe. I think that the people and the opposition leaders and a lot of these parties are getting tired of their leaders massaging Trump's ego, kissing his ass, kissing the ring. And I think that they're going to force them to sort of, if they haven't woken up already, I think that they're going to be forced to start dealing with Trump in a tougher way. Because look, we've seen this. The leaders who do stand up to Trump, they get the results. I mean, they actually get positive results. It's the ones who try to appease him and coddle him that he treats worse. And so I think that that's a lesson that they're learning. I think they're afraid to be untethered from the United States, both in a military way and an economic way, but they have to realize that the United States is very much dependent on Europe as well, in many ways. Both our military bases there are extremely valuable to us strategically, and the economic ties that we have, including holding the debt and many other things. We have, I think the latest number I saw was that Europe imports about $100 billion worth of U.S. goods per year. I mean, if they slap those with retaliatory tariffs, that's going to hurt a tremendous number of American companies and workers. So I think what it is that Europe has a lot of very powerful levers that they can use against the United States, but they have chosen not to up to this point, thinking that, Trump will start behaving themselves if they play nice. But I think it's just going to be time for them to get tough.
I would like to think that European leaders are employing mental health professionals to have in their kind of armor so that they can analyze the threat. Because, I always bring it back to mental health with this guy. It's a taboo subject in American media, well, in international media, really. But if you only need to learn a little bit about personality disorders to know that this guy will always go back on his word, will deny stuff that he's said, will change the deal halfway through the deal and after the deal. And a lot of this, I did many, many, many weeks of interviewing mental health professionals on the weekend show before Trump was reelected. And, they said he is violent. He is a dangerous, violent person. He would never get a job in the real world. He is somebody that needs to be watched very, very carefully. And the problem is when he's doing the comedy with the bulldog clip and everything, it takes the edge off of the dictatorship. But I really hope that European leaders recognize that he is as dangerous as dictators from history. And just because he's not wearing an armband, it doesn't mean that he isn't, has that kind of, there is that potential risk there. Gavin Newsom at Davos was, representing the fourth largest economy in the world in California. He had some criticism of world leaders for not just cozying up to him, but just kind of letting him get away with stuff. Let's have a quick look.
I can't take this complicity. People rolling over. I should have brought a bunch of knee pads for all the world leaders. This guy's playing folks for fools, and it's embarrassing. This is diplomacy with Donald Trump. He's a T-Rex. You mate with him or he devours you. One or the other.
T-Rex also has very small hands, I should point out. Do you think Newsom is right to be saying this stuff?
Yeah, when most of the leading Democratic contenders continue to remain in their states, doing their thing, Gavin Newsom is running a 4-year campaign for president. He rolls into Davos, which I was a little surprised, not surprised because he represents a huge economy, but the fact that, he's over there and playing such a vocal role. By the way, Trump banned him from the U.S., like the tent setup that they have there to do interviews and stuff like that, from different U.S. politicians. Trump banned him from that pavilion today. So he was supposed to show up and do an interview with, I think, Forbes magazine or something, and he wasn't allowed in because of those comments. But, it was interesting to see him say that because he's calling out European leaders, Macron, Merz, Starmer, and I was curious, like, wow, that was very strong language, what he just said. So I was kind of interested in two things as far as like, what was the European reaction to that? Him going over there saying that. And then, what was the reaction in the U.S.? And the reaction in the U.S. I saw, I mean, of course, the Democratic activists agreed with what he said, but I think a lot of people, the old, establishment type figures, your New York Times, Washington Post correspondents and people like that, thought it was a bad move. They thought that it was rude and obnoxious and that Newsom should not have gone over there and said that about them. But, according to Newsom, he claims that they're all coming up to him behind the scenes whispering, yeah, we're glad you said that. We need a kick in the ass. So I don't know, whether his remarks were well received over there, but I mean, basically, he said the same kind of things that Carney said in his speech, but in a more bare-knuckled, raw way.
Let's talk about Trump's speech, which we should start by saying was one of the most offensive, racist, aggressive campaign-style speeches we've ever heard from him. It went on too long. It didn't make much sense. He was talking about the election being rigged, you know, stuff that just has nothing to do. And windmills, of course, which are... No one seems to have reminded him that these things are called wind turbines. And again, lying about China making them and saying China doesn't use them. I mean, completely false. China has the use of more renewable energy in the form of wind and solar than many other countries. Europe, just speaking as a European now, Europe takes climate change extremely seriously. There aren't opposition politicians to the climate crisis. You know, there might be a few fringy people, but everybody is on board, conservatives and obviously progressives alike, that they know that science is real. There is no, you know, they also know it's profitable as well. They know that this whole kind of green movement is the new industrial revolution. And that it can be very profitable for all nations. And so for Trump to try and talk them out of it, it's so embarrassing. Like, it makes absolutely no sense to these people.
Two things happen along the lines. First of all, he said, this is a new line for him. He said that the countries that have the most windmills are the poorest countries on earth. That was one thing he said. And then Howard Lutnick got booed and heckled when he said, you know, renewable energy is a waste of time and money and effort, and we should just rely on fossil fuels and stuff. And he was almost like booed out of the building when he said that. So, well, it's not up for debate in Europe, right? It's like science is science. Let's take a look at Trump's speech.
There are windmills all over Europe. There are windmills all over the place. And they are losers. One thing I've noticed is that the more windmills a country has, the more money that country loses and the worse that country is doing. China makes almost all of the windmills, and yet I haven't been able to find any wind farms in China. Did you ever think of that? It's a good way of looking at it. They're smart. China's very smart. They make them, they sell them for a fortune. They sell them to the stupid people that buy them, but they don't use them themselves. They put up a couple of big wind farms, but they don't use them. They just put them up to show people what they could look like. They don't spin. They don't do anything. They use a thing called coal, mostly.
Yeah, clean coal, apparently. It's just embarrassing for the United States to be, led by somebody who's so obviously bonkers, but also naive about climate change. I mean, so many of Trump's policies, not least the drilling and the expansion of coal, but everything that he's talking about doing, including AI, is going to have such a detrimental effect on the climate crisis. And there's just no talk of it in America.
You know, the thing is, like, it's not even just about climate change, too. I mean, that's obviously very important. But, you know, even if you're like a staunch Republican who believes, you know, climate change is a hoax or climate change isn't caused by human activity, you know, renewable energy just makes sense from an economic perspective as well. I mean, we're already, if you pay any attention to the AI data center stuff, they're already saying that in 5 years, they need to double the amount of power that they're using now, which is why Musk is freaking out. And he's looking at building power plants in space because when she was all excited about this week, claiming he had cracked the code on how to build a nuclear plant in space for his AI. But, you know, he might be doing more ketamine. He might have upped his ketamine dosage this week. But, you know, I mean, it's just these AI companies want to just use up a tremendous amount of power. They understand that it's not going to come from fossil fuels and from the grid that's currently in existence. So they want it they understand that it's got to be powered by solar and renewables. Right. They get it, but Trump doesn't get it. And the other thing is, by the way, China has the most active wind turbines in the world and the most solar panels in the world.
Yes.
They understand, and the most EVs. I mean, they are building a 21st century economy while Trump wants an 1890s economy.
The electric car was invented decades ago and it was killed. Famously, there's a very good documentary called Who Killed the Electric Car? And it was because, the technology has always been there. I mean, you go right back to the kind of Model T. These vehicles were all run off of batteries. And so there was this kind of huge movement by the fossil fuel industry in America to kind of kill anything that was not using coal and oil and gas. And because obviously the profit motive. Now, the world has changed. Technology has changed. Battery technology has changed. And to have a president that is not on board with that is just so backward. And it further isolates him from Europe, who, as I say, take this stuff very seriously. But also, as you say, it gives China the upper hand. And it means that, once Trumpism has died and disappeared, it might be a generation, who knows, America is going to be left stuck 20 or 30 years behind everybody else.
And what did Mark Carney do last week? Mark Carney lifted tariffs on Chinese EVs. So
yeah,
they had 100% tariff on Chinese EVs, made it impossible to sell them in Canada. But now it's going, I think, to like 10%. So you're going to have lots of Chinese EVs in Canada in the next few years, which is going to, it could cause some short-term pain for the Canadian auto industry, which is largely American, with auto plants, American companies with plants in Canada. But, it's going to lead to really the electrification of driving in Canada, which will have long-term benefits for them. I also saw MAGA talking about starting to retaliate by saying that they would ban Chinese EVs, because there aren't any in the United States, ban Chinese EVs from driving across the border because they don't even want Americans to see them, because they're actually pretty badass.
They're better. That's right. They're better. I've watched a bunch of reviews and in every way. I mean, they all do 500-mile range at least, and they
just
don't
so
want
much Americans seeing Canadian driving EVs, Chinese
right.
EVs.
Right. Okay. I've got one final clip of Trump. We were talking earlier about his kind of cognitive decline. When you are confusing Greenland and Iceland and you keep saying it over and over again, that really exposes how out of it you are. And I really was thinking about how these European leaders sitting around and world leaders sitting around just having to overlook stuff and humor him. It really is it's like having a mad king and everybody just having to, because he has the keys to the world economy. It's just embarrassing, the amount of just, playing along, playing the game, letting him get away with stuff that anybody else would never have been given so much rope with which to hang themselves. Let's take a look.
I don't know that they'd be there for us. They're not there for us on Iceland, that I can tell you. I mean, our stock market took the first dip yesterday because of Iceland. So Iceland's already cost us a lot of money. But that dip is peanuts compared to what it's gone up. And we
3 times and never corrected himself.
Yeah, multiple times throughout the speech, he mixed up Greenland and Iceland. And the clips went hugely viral. They're all over social media right now. Everybody's making fun of Trump. So what does Caroline Leavitt do? The propagandist in chief of the administration, habitual liar. She put out a post saying Trump did not mix them up. She is now claiming that Trump meant to say Iceland, or he was referring to Greenland having a lot of ice when he said that. I think that's what she said.
Oh my God.
I mean, it's just, everyone heard it. Everyone listened to the clips. Millions and millions of people, probably 20 million people have heard that clip already today. And she is out there denying that he mixed them up. I mean, she is so desperate to try and claim that this guy never makes a mistake, is infallible, is perfect, is sharp as a tack, when the whole world can see that that is not the case. Even his own supporters can see that's not the case, except for a tiny handful of hardcore cultists. But she is one of those tiny handful of hardcore cultists.
Her complicity is, I mean, it's so blatant and frightening. And I really hope one day she gets held to account for being, for really kind of supporting the worst aspects of this regime. So the biggest story to come out of Davos, Ron, was the fact that Trump is now, Taco Trump is backtracking on taking Greenland by force. Now that has obviously caused a huge amount of relief from world leaders, not least the people of Denmark and Greenland itself, or Iceland.
Which is like, it just mystifies me that would cause anyone any relief. And I know I read the comments. Oh, at least he's not. That's today. I mean, when are these guys going to understand? He said that today. Tomorrow he will say something different. Like, why would they take something he said today and find solace in that when the track record is clear? He changes his mind hourly, you know.
I'll quote him. He said he was seeking immediate negotiations to once again discuss the acquisition of Greenland by the United States. I don't want to use force. I won't use force. All the US is asking for is a place called Greenland. You can say yes, and we will be very appreciative, or you can say no, and we will remember. I mean, what point does the threat end? You know, because as you say, he can turn on a dime, but ultimately the question should not be like, how are we going to take Greenland? It should just be off the table. Could we just talk about the excuse that he's giving for taking Greenland, which is that America needs it for the Golden Dome, which is this kind of pipe dream project that he wants to have a kind of dome system, anti-missile defense system like Israel has, which is of course impossible with a country the size of America. But they already have dozens of US bases in Greenland. So why is the media not pushing him to talk about reactivating these bases and having a greater military presence in Greenland like they used to, rather than these lies about, oh, well, if we don't take Greenland, Russia will or China will, which is completely untrue.
Yeah, for his Golden Dome dream, he needs Greenland, he needs Canada to allow him to build their early warning systems or missile defense systems, all of that. So two of the countries that he's gone out of his way repeatedly to alienate and piss off are the two countries he needs the most. So he thinks he's going to, through threats and intimidation, bring this about. But the point is, yes, Greenland, we have early warning systems already in northern Greenland. Anyone can put them. They've already said you can put whatever you want in Greenland. We have empty military bases in Greenland that they said you can. In other words, when we vacated military bases and Trump drew down the number of troops that were stationed in Greenland, the people in Denmark could have done. They had two choices. One is they could have dismantled the bases, tore them down, developed them for other things, whatever, or they could have left them the same and maintained the upkeep, so that if the United States ever decided to go back in there, they could. And that's what they have chosen to do. They have maintained these bases that the U.S. has vacated to make sure that the U.S., if they ever wanted to come back, could have them back free of charge. So whenever Trump is confronted about this, which is rare, with the fact that, Denmark has already said you can do whatever you want with Greenland militarily. As far as stationing troops and stuff there, he says, well, we need ownership. Just renting something or leasing something is not the same. We need to own it. Well, I mean, really what he's saying is we want to extract the resources from the country. We want to extract the minerals, all of that stuff. It has nothing to do with military security, golden dome. So every time he's confronted with the facts about this, he reverts back to, we need to possess it. We need to own it, because that is what he has his mind. He's fixated on that the same way he's fixated on the Nobel Prize. It's an obsession. And the 2020 election. He has certain things that he gets fixated on, windmills, which goes back decades. And he simply will not leave it alone. And much to Europe's consternation, this is something that he is not going to stop talking about.
And of course, Vladimir Putin is sitting back and enjoying the show, because if the US was to take Greenland, then that gives Putin the advantage because he has a hold over Trump. And it just, everything seems to kind of go back to the Kremlin, as I often say on this. We're going to talk about that in just a second, because we can take a quick break, but then we're going to come back and talk about Trump inviting Vladimir Putin to be a member of his Board of Peace for the Middle East. We'll do that next here on Uncovered. Channel the fresh start energy of the new year and finally launch your business with Spotify. 2026 is the year you rewrite your story, your own future, and make your entrepreneurial dreams come true. Start your business with Shopify in 2026 and become who you're meant to be. 2026 is the year you launch your business, the year you transform into an entrepreneur, founder, boss. One powerful move puts your future firmly in your hands. Starting a business with Shopify. Maybe you've got an idea you can't shake, a craft everyone tells you to sell, a store you've already designed in your head. With Shopify, 2026 is when you finally make it happen. Shopify gives you everything you need to sell online and in person. Millions of entrepreneurs have already made this leap, from household names to first-time business owners just getting started. Shopify gives you all the tools to easily build your dream store. Choose from hundreds of beautiful templates that you can customize to match your brand. Setup is fast with Shopify's built-in AI tools that write product descriptions and headlines and help you edit product photos. Marketing is built in. Create email and social campaigns that reach customers wherever they scroll. As you grow, Shopify grows with you. Handle more orders, expand to new markets, and do it all from the same dashboard. In 2026, stop waiting and start selling with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/uncovered. Go to shopify.com/uncovered. That's shopify.com/uncovered. Hear your first this new year with Shopify by your side. It's New Year's resolution season. I've tried some wild ones, like convincing myself I'm suddenly a 6 a.m. workout guy, or that I'm finally going to learn another language. There is one resolution that's actually within reach this year, and that's where Mando comes in. I've been using their whole body deodorant, and yes, I've actually received it and used it, and I started with the obvious spots like pits, and then I went full send, thighs, feet, and even the hard-to-reach areas, and it works. What surprised me the most is it's not just for masking odor, it actually stops it. I throw it on after my shower, and I'm good all day. Sometimes even into the next day too. No irritation, no weird residue, just fresh. Mando's doctor-created, aluminium-free, baking soda-free, and safe to use anywhere on your body. Solid stick, spray, whatever works for you. So don't mask it, Mando it. You can find Mando at Walmart or Target, but for the best deal, go to shopmando.com and use code UNCOVERED for 20% off plus free shipping. That's shopmando.com, code UNCOVERED. Support the show and smell better doing it. Mando's got you covered. Welcome back, and you can find links to our sponsors down in the description below. So, Ron, let's talk about this Board of Peace that Donald Trump has created. To me, it seems like he's doing it because he knows that the Middle East is not as stable as he would like it to be, and by sharing the responsibility with everybody else, maybe it takes the heat off of him a little bit. But the biggest kind of, or the weirdest moment was when he was asked by a reporter if he'd invited Vladimir Putin to be a member of the Board of Peace, and he said yes. Let's have a quick look.
Have you invited President Putin to be a member of the Board of Peace? Yeah, he's been invited.
Do you have any response to President Macron saying he will not join the Board of Peace?
Oh, did he say that? Well,
Yeah.
Nobody wants him because he's going to be out of office very soon. So, that's all right. What I'll do is if they feel like Costco, I'll put a 200% tariff on his wines and champagnes, and he'll join. But he doesn't have to join. If he said that, you're probably giving it to me a little bit differently. But if he actually did say that, but as you know, he's going to be out of office in a few months.
Trump finds everything out from the press, doesn't he? He doesn't seem to have any advice as to what's going on in the world.
Well, because they don't want to give him bad news. I mean, if it's something negative, they're all afraid to tell him stuff because he'll start yelling at them, shoots the messenger, But this is, this is wild. First of all, Macron's in office for another year and a half. So he said a couple more months. Macron's got a while to go. Trump has 3 years. Macron's got 18 months. So, not that huge of a difference here. But anyway, what this Board of Peace thing is, how it was sold was it was supposed to do two things originally. It was supposed to be an international peacekeeping force where all these countries were going to come together to disarm Hamas. That was number one. Number two was to rebuild Gaza economically. Okay, which bad vibes on both of those scores. Number one, I don't see them really being that successful in disarming Hamas. I don't think boots on the ground is going to go that well for us there either. And I think the economic redevelopment, I think what most people realize about Trump is this is not a situation where he wants to go in there and help the Gazan people. He wants to displace them. He wants to move them out of there, and he wants to develop it and let Israel also be in there playing a role, which will be a disaster. And so that's really how he originally sold it, which was pretty bad in and of itself. But then the details came out this week, and the details are much worse than even that, because what this really is not really just about Gaza. This is about Trump trying to create his own United Nations and really trying to put, in theory, the UN out of business by creating a separate sort of shadow UN where, by the way, Trump is the Secretary General. Trump is in charge of this thing, and basically doing a lot of the roles in theory that the UN does. He also attached to that was a $1 billion entry fee, for countries who wanted to become permanent members had to put in $1 billion, and Trump decides how this money gets spent. So, I think a lot of the countries, Macron saw this and was like, this would violate the French Constitution, so I don't think we're going to be able to do it. Zelensky was asked about it, and he was like, well, I can't imagine sitting at a Board of Peace meeting with Vladimir Putin, who's bombing my country every day. And he also, by the way, Trump also invited Lukashenko from Belarus, who is Putin's puppet, who is also no friend to Ukraine. So literally you're going to have, I think what you're going to see here is, you'll have the Board of Peace will be like not Colombia. It'll be Russia, Belarus, North Korea, I don't know, Indonesia, countries like that. It's not Hungary, it's not going to be, it's not going to look anything like people who are interested in peace. So this whole thing is turning out to be a disaster. And by the way, it's going to be another issue as what you just saw, where Trump is going to seek revenge against every country who doesn't want to be a part of it. He'll go after them. Maybe he'll hit them with tariffs. Who knows? But yeah, this whole thing is it's another Trump boondoggle.
Inviting Benjamin Netanyahu to be on the board as well has also caused controversy, because the whole point was that, this is external influence rather than internal influence. We know what Netanyahu wants for Gaza, and really he should be on the outside of this board, surely. Yeah,
I don't think that it's helpful to have Israel play a role in Gaza. I mean, I understand why they want to, but if this is really supposed to be a neutral third-party organization that, isn't taking sides and is going to do what's in the best interest of the people there, you certainly would not involve Israel. So, because Israel basically wants a piece of Gaza as well, and they want to control Gaza. They want to set up a puppet government in there that they control. And nobody wants to see Hamas running Gaza. I mean, I understand that part of it. Okay. But that is not really what this is all about, and if it was, then it could have some good intentions, but the bottom line is it's a quagmire. And, I don't think there's anyone in the United States, apart from a few really hardcore Israel people on the right, who want the United States in Gaza in any material way. Other than
unless there's a real estate deal to be had.
Other than humanitarian aid.
Yeah. Because Jared Kushner and Howard Lutnick, I mean, these people are very much at the forefront of these negotiations, and they are ultimately kind of looking ahead to some kind of real estate deal that is going to make them rich for life.
Witkoff is in there too. Yeah.
Witkoff. Sorry.
Yep.
Interchangeable henchmen from Trump's perspective. But, what saddens me about it.
Why would you want Russia in there, by the way? Israel doesn't want Russia in there.
Well, this is Trump doing the quid pro quo, isn't it? I mean, this is further proof that Russia has a hold over Trump. Trump is trying to introduce Russia and normalize this brutality. And we're going to see, I mean, Ukraine is going to be the way that Ukraine kind of plays out is going to be a disaster from America's perspective. America will draw down and draw down and draw down until Europe is carrying the entire can for Ukraine, clearly. But this is just Trump doing more of Putin's bidding by stealth.
Yeah, it's another thing that would legitimize Putin, basically. But yeah, it's definitely not. Look, Israel is not a friend of Russia, so they certainly do not want Russia in Gaza in any way. It's another insane, crazy idea that is probably going nowhere and is going to result in more conflicts for us. And it's really just about building up Trump and promoting him. And by the way, Witkoff was over in Davos, and he was asked about a question at a forum this morning about he said, how can you always both sides things? How can you always say that Russia wants peace when Russia is bombing civilian population centers and energy infrastructure, when Ukraine is not doing that to Russia? Ukraine is not bombing Russian cities and apartment buildings and hospitals. And he said, well, it's war. These are the kind of things that countries do in war. So, it's not. They're war crimes is what they are.
Yeah. And the fact that Russia has denounced the International Criminal Court and Israel has denounced the International Criminal Court and the United States has denounced the International Criminal Court tells you everything you need to know about what these regimes stand for.
Absolutely, because Trump may at one point be facing an indictment from that court. So sure, absolutely. And Putin already is.
Let's go back to some domestic issues. ICE are continuing their rampage in Minneapolis and elsewhere. They're talking about rolling out this back to Los Angeles. The National Guard were drawn down in Los Angeles. They're talking about putting this kind of increased ICE numbers on the streets of LA. What we've seen in Minneapolis, both leading up to and post the murder of Renee Good, has been this huge protest movement. Incredible, really, that people have found the time to do this, because as we know, it's much harder for Americans to protest because, of work requirements, and your healthcare is tied to your work. And therefore, if you're not at work, then you risk losing your healthcare and losing your job. And it's a kind of
let's not
very fast spiral.
It's 20 degrees below zero also,
Exactly that.
January in Minnesota.
the resolve of those who have come out, and people have crossed state lines to come and support these protests. But the effect now is that we're seeing the kind of the potential for civil war between law enforcement, local law enforcement, and Trump's kind of paramilitary army who are just grabbing people. And it was actually the Brooklyn Park police chief who came out and was, very clear about the situation that was unfolding and how it needed to be handled. Let's take a look.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mark Ruley, Police Chief of the City of Brooklyn Park. Behind me is a bunch of amazing police chiefs that are here in support of a very short but very important message that we want to share with you. What you won't hear from any of us today is rhetoric of abolish ICE or that there shouldn't be immigration enforcement. The truth is, immigration enforcement is necessary for our national security and for local security. But how it's done is extremely important. In fact, we have a long history of working exceptionally well with our federal partners, including ICE agents, and we have seen the best of them perform their job extremely well in the past. With that said, recently, as the last 2 weeks, we, as law enforcement community, have been receiving endless complaints about civil rights violations in our streets from U.S. citizens. What we're hearing is they're being stopped in traffic stops or on the street with no cause and being forced to demand paperwork to determine if they are here legally. As this went on over the past 2 weeks, we started hearing from our police officers the same complaints as they fell victim to this while off duty. Every one of these individuals is a person of color who has had this happen to them. In Brooklyn Park, one particular officer that shared her story with me was stopped as she passed ICE going down the roadway. When they boxed her in, they demanded her paperwork, of which she's a U.S. citizen and clearly would not have any paperwork. When she became concerned about the rhetoric and the way she was being treated, she pulled out her phone. In an attempt to record the incident, the phone was knocked out of her hands, prevented her from recording it. The officer had their guns drawn during this interaction. And after the officer became so concerned, they were forced to identify themselves as a Brooklyn Park police officer in hopes of slowing the incident and de-escalating the incident down. The agents then immediately left after hearing this, making no other comments, no other apologies, just got in their vehicles and left. I wish I could tell you that this was an isolated incident. In fact, many of the chiefs standing behind me have similar incidents with their off-duty officers. This isn't just important because it happened to off-duty police officers, but what it did do is we know that our officers know what the Constitution is, they know what right and wrong is, and they know when people are being targeted, and that's what they were. If it is happening to our officers, it pains me to think of how many of our community members are falling victim to this every day. It has to stop.
I mean, this is a first, really, isn't it? To see local law enforcement come out and use language like this. And it was so interesting that it was his own law enforcement officers off duty that were being stopped, and they were all people of color.
Yeah. And by the way, you see how what the news media does, by the way. I mean, you have that clip, was aired by News Nation, which is supposedly supposed to be like a down the middle CNN type network, not
no chance.
Not Fox. It's Chris Cuomo's their main anchor. But what do they do? Like, they put the chief who's saying something extremely powerful and important off in this little box on the right, and they're showing probably the most objectionable protest, which is the church protest, which we can talk about, as their main thing. And objectionable meaning of the general public. I think a lot of the general public has, even the ones who are strongly agreeing with the protesters, have said that they disagree with going inside that one church. So News Nation puts that protest on the screen while he's talking about traffic stops and racial profiling, so you just see how the news media just diverts from the main story. But what he said was powerful. It's like, look, if you don't believe people of color when they're telling you over and over all around the country that they're being racially profiled by ICE and they're being pulled over because of and harassed because of their accent or their skin color, you don't believe them. I'm here to tell you that my officers off duty, not in uniform, are getting pulled over. And every one of them is a person of color. And they're getting harassed by ICE. And of course, once ICE figures out, oh, they're police officers, they let them go. But this is happening. He's saying this is happening to my officers. So if you don't believe everyone else, what are you going to say, that the police are lying too? So we know that this is happening, and we know that the Supreme Court has basically, in a recent decision, given them a blank check to do these kind of stops, and they're taking full advantage of it. So I think, it's a situation where Trump has taken the issue that got him elected, the issue that he campaigned on, that he spent the most money on, ran the most ads on, polled the best on, even when his polls went underwater on every other issue in like March and April. He was the only one he was above water on, which was like 51%, was the immigration issue. And now he's underwater on that. Why? Because of what the chief just said. The chief just said, I'm not an abolish ICE guy. I think immigration enforcement is important. I'm not a liberal on this. But the way they're going about this is wrong. And I think that that's where 60% of the country is.
The problem for me, though, is that how long is it going to be before anything changes? Because they are recruiting people at a rate of knots. I'm sure you saw that story last week of a journalist who applied to be an ICE agent. Absolutely. With no previous experience and was basically given the job on the spot, and told to get out there.
Interview, though.
Right.
She did have an interview for 6 minutes.
But then she got told that she'd been given the job in another email that she hadn't seen. Yeah. It was the whole setup was a mess. And she went for the drug test, and then off the back of that, she got told that she had the job. I mean, they are clearly recruiting anyone that is prepared to take on these jobs. And I often hear from people saying, oh, well, some of ICE are people of color themselves. And that really isn't the point here. The point is that the job that they've been given to do is to ethnically cleanse the streets of America. Yeah. And if you heard what Trump said in Davos in his speech about Somalis, it was so racist and so offensive. I mean, he even used the line that if it wasn't for us, you'd all be speaking German, which is one of the worst tropes you can say to Europeans about the Second World War. In fact, let me just show that clip because I forgot to show it earlier.
And then after the war, which we won it big. Without us, right now, you'd all be speaking German and a little Japanese, perhaps.
I mean, so racist and so offensive, but that is the mindset of white supremacists and the people like Stephen Miller who will stop at nothing. Their quotas of 3,000 arrests a day. They're basically just taking anyone now. They've run out of criminals to arrest, so they're just taking anybody of color who doesn't have their passport on them.
Yeah, so I don't know if he realizes that he's in Switzerland when he's giving that speech and warning them, without us, you'd all be speaking German, when the main language of Switzerland is German. So they are speaking German, even with us. So I don't know where he's coming from there, but anyway, back to the. You're right. It's going to get worse. The reason why it's going to get worse is because, look, the people that are primarily out on the street right now are their most experienced officers. They haven't even brought online all the knuckleheads that they're hiring, and the reason why the woman who I think was a Slate reporter, or Slate or Salon, one of the ones that begins with an S, is the one who did that application and went through the whole process. What we've also learned is that the reason why that happened is they're using AI to screen applications. And how that got found out is because, which they had to admit a mistake, is if you have any prior law enforcement experience, if you've been a cop in the past, then you get to skip even the abbreviated new ICE Academy, which is now used to be 9 weeks and now 47 days. You even get to skip that if you have prior law enforcement experience, you have to do like a 5-day online class and you get your ice gear. You know, it's like that. They're rushing people through that quick. And what they're doing is they used AI to go through the applications. And if the AI detected the word officer on your resume, it automatically processed you through to bypass the academy. Well, you had people that were like loan officers. You know, if they just use the word officer anywhere in their application, they got to skip the academy. So that literally happened with like hundreds of applicants who had no law enforcement experience, but they used the word officer somewhere in their application, and therefore they were processed through. So they had to kick them all out of that program and say, no, I'm sorry, we made a mistake. You now have to go to the academy. So that this shows you the type of screening that's involved, which is no screening. The academies are abbreviated. The courses are online. The background checks are shady. So when we have another 10, 20,000 of those guys out on the street with that kind of screening, it's going to get a lot worse.
And we've seen already, I mean, you say that these people haven't come online yet, but you would think they have if you look at the videos of the way that these supposed experienced people are behaving. I mean, not least Jonathan Ross, who fired the gun at Renee
He's
Good.
Like a 10-year vet.
Right.
Yeah. I mean,
it makes
he's supposed to be one of their best trained guys.
Yeah. Meanwhile, they all look completely out of shape. They all look like there is no direction in their management of a situation. People are jumping people. People are smashing car windows. The one of that woman who identified herself as disabled and autistic, who was on her way to a doctor's appointment, who said, I've been attacked by the police before, and they pulled her out the vehicle. I found that one particularly distressing. And these videos doing the rounds are the proof that Trump is operating in a completely different lane. I mean, obviously there's no mention of it at Davos, but anybody that's seen these videos is listening to Trump trying to, claim that he's world king, when at home, his henchmen are abducting anybody, including American citizens.
Yep. Because look, it's difficult, I guess, to find people who aren't committing crimes. So the type of tactics that you have to do to find them is illegal tactics and aggressive tactics. And and they have their quotas. And now we have more reporting now that they're getting rewards, like they're getting bonuses based on the number of arrests that they're making. So not only do you have these poorly trained yahoos who are all excited to get their camo and their battle gear and their automatic weapons, but now they're getting bonuses for the number of people that they bring in, like they're bounty hunters. I mean, this is a recipe for disaster. And I think the problem is Americans have sometimes selective hearing, and politicians understand how to appeal to that. And when I think a lot of moderate independent voters heard Trump say during the campaign that he was going to deport criminal illegal aliens, they heard people who have committed crimes in the United States, right? People who are not citizens who committed crime. That's who Trump is going to go after. But when Trump said that line, he means they're all criminals. He means they're criminals because they're here. Whether they have legitimate asylum claims or temporary protected status, as far as he's concerned, they're criminals just for being here. So when he said we're going to round up all the criminal illegal aliens, what American voters heard, many of them, is ones who committed crimes. But what Trump was actually saying is all of them.
If just go back to Davos for a second, I got from his speech that he was talking about a white supremacist Europe. And he was doing this very subtly, not using the actual language, but being, hinting at, you people, you're very smart. He was talking about white people being very smart, and that leaders are very smart. Well, of course, you don't have to be smart to be a leader. You just have to get elected. Trump has proven that. But all of the language, and I really hope the media picks up on this, is about a kind of Aryan, white Aryan race dominating the world. And we're seeing it at home with the ethnic cleansing on the streets. We're seeing it with these, far right parties in Europe that are cropping up and Trump is endorsing. But we're now hearing it from Trump at this World Economic Forum, talking in riddles. But for anybody that can read between the lines, he's basically saying that the white people are the people that should be controlling the world because they are superior.
So, yeah, this is a messaging that's being pushed by principally Elon Musk, but, J.D.
Yes.
Vance, that whole crew, Stephen Miller, of course. But if you just any day randomly decide to jump on Elon Musk's Twitter page and read what he posts that day, it's all about immigration in Europe and, white people being destroyed or, wiped out by immigrants. That's what it's all about. So that's what Trump is parroting those lines, which is, basically saying like, you guys are destroying yourselves. You're destroying your own countries and you need to stop doing it. You need to stop the immigration, all of that. So yeah, that's what he's doing, and the ironic thing is like so many of these MAGA people, I saw the other day that when they talk about voter ID, that if they pass like a voter ID law, they ought to require passports because no MAGA voters have passports. I thought that was a clever little thing. Instead of driver's license, let's make it passports. You have to show a passport to vote. Yeah. But it's true because it's a common theme among Trump supporters that they don't travel. They haven't been abroad. And so, but they're experts in what's going on in other countries around the world because of what they read on social media, even though they've never actually ever left the United States.
You mentioned in that clip, the News Nation clip of the protest at the church. Now, Don Lemon was there, who's now is he an independent journalist now, I guess? Yep. But it seems that MAGA are going after him now, and they're claiming that, he shouldn't have been there and he was involved in a crime because he was covering it. Just give me the backstory before I play this Benny Johnson clip.
So the backstory is this is going to be a very big deal. I think this time next week, everyone's going to be talking about this because people are going to be indicted federally, possibly Don Lemon, and there's going to be some high profile arrests, and they're going to make a very big deal out of this case. So even though very few people are aware of this situation right now and are following it, I'm following it very closely because I try to get ahead of these things and I listen to what they're saying. And this time next week, this is going to be a massive story. So what it is that these protest groups, I guess they got information, I don't know, accurate or not, but one of the pastors at the church was an ICE agent or was working with ICE to identify people in the community. And so they decided to go and protest this particular pastor. Unfortunately, they decided to do it in the middle of a church service on a Sunday morning, which I thought was not the most effective way to win your argument because the optics of it weren't great. You have a bunch of people, parishioners in the audience, they're praying, they're reading their Bibles, and then you have all these protesters coming in. So, and yelling and screaming and stuff. So I thought, if you're going after the pastor, you could have gone, he's in his office throughout the week. You could have gone any other time other than the church service. But obviously the plan was to disrupt the church service. The problem is there's a federal statute specifically prohibits you from interrupting church services. It's the FACE Act. And interestingly enough, it's tied with the abortion clinic statute, which is when Democrats at the time, when there was a lot of harassment of people at abortion clinics, where a lot of the religious people were protesting the people and harassing people going into the clinics, coming out, the doctors, the nurses, people were actually getting shot. The Democrats wanted to pass this law to prevent harassing people going into abortion clinics. Well, the compromise with Republicans was Republicans said, okay, we'll agree to that, but you also have to include church services. So if you read the FACE Act, the first part talks about interrupting abortion clinic stuff. And then the second half talks about interrupting church services. So they're included in the same statute. And so that's the problem here, is that probably if you read that statute, you could certainly make a strong case that these people violated it because they interrupted the church service. Had they gone any other time, it would have been okay. Don Lemon got swept up in this because he was there. He was filming it, recording it. I think he interviewed the pastor. Now, Lemon's defense is that he was just covering it as a journalist. He had nothing to do with the protest. He didn't even know it was taking place. He saw them heading that way and kind of went in with them. What the Civil Rights Division chief of the Department of Justice, Harmeet Dillon, is claiming is that she doesn't believe him. She thinks he was the one who orchestrated it and organized it for publicity, and he was very much involved. So I think you've got the entire MAGA mob, all the right-wing influencers on social media calling for blood, wanting indictments. Grand jury subpoenas have gone out to multiple people that were involved. And I think what you're going to see, there's a tremendous amount of pressure being put on Pam Bondi over this. I think you're going to see multiple arrests, and that's going to result in possibly even bigger protests.
Let's take a look.
Your response to Don Lemon.
Well, look, I mean, we have a presumption of innocence in this country, so I want to preserve my ethical duties here. But let me just say that, he's a journalist. He was a journalist. I don't know what he is now, but journalism is not a badge or a shield that protects you from criminal consequences when you are part of a crime. And I think the videos show how close he was to these folks. I think further evidence will show more information about that, but he clearly knew, and he stated before going into the facility, it's on his own video, what was going to happen there. What was going to happen was a violation of federal law, federal criminal law. And I don't know what to say. I mean, the FACE Act has been out there for more than 30 years, and there were lawyers involved in this so-called protest, and their purpose was to terrorize people of faith in a house of worship. They were targeting a different pastor, not the one seen on camera, who they got information was a ICE supervisor. None of that matters. It's off limits to go into a house of worship to do your little protest. Protests can occur on public property. Protests can occur outside, on a sidewalk, certain sidewalks, not all sidewalks. And this is like basic what you learn in the first year of law school. There's a time, place, and manner restrictions on the First Amendment right of protest, and they were violated here in this case. No question about it. The only question is who was involved, how many were involved, and how many charges are going to be brought here. Those are the questions.
Your little protest there.
I'll say a couple things about that.
Go on.
First of all, the head of the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division should not be on right-wing podcasters talking about pending investigations and prosecutions. That's number one. And she's on social media every day chirping about this. That's number one. And number two, one of the first things Trump did when he took office is pardoned everyone who was convicted under the FACE Act of protesting the abortion clinics. He pardoned all of them. Some of them were in prison who were convicted of it, and he pardoned them too and dropped all the pending cases. So Trump already said, we are not enforcing the FACE Act against abortion clinic people. And yet now they're going to use the FACE Act to go after these people. So it's obviously the double standard here too.
We have to finish. Probably just time for one more. Should we mention the Labour Secretary, Lori Chavez Durema, who she's been hiding alcohol and taking people to strip clubs. What's the story here?
So, it seems like every couple of weeks I change my mind on who's going to be the first Trump cabinet secretary to be fired. I've changed it from, Patel is not really a cabinet secretary, but, he's an FBI director. I had Patel at one point. I think my latest was Nome. Now I'm going with Chavez DeRemer, the labor secretary. She's in very, very serious trouble. And I think that Trump is probably going to have to fire her because, by the way, this inspector general is a Trump supporting Republican, former congressman, who's the inspector general who is basically like suspended her chief of staff, her deputies. Basically what happened is when she took office, she said, I'm going to do a 50-state tour of the United States as labor secretary. I'm going to get out in the field and find out what's going on in the country. When it turns out that really the point of her 50-state tour was so she could spend a little extramarital, she's married, time with her boyfriend that she's having an affair with, that they can travel the country together, similar to what Kristi Noem is doing with Corey Lewandowski. So she's been traveling around the country, and you know, she went to one event in Miami for like 5 days. Her boyfriend went with her, alleged boyfriend was with her on the trip, who doesn't work for, I think, the Labor Department. And she gave a 20-minute speech at this event and stayed there for 5 days. You know? And this is all on the taxpayer dime. Wow. So what they have found out is she's basically like using her position and her travel budget to have these liaisons and travel the country with this person she's having an affair with. She's having her secretary, her chief of staff and principal deputy cover these things up and set up these meetings. I guess they searched her office and found a big stash of alcohol in her office, which is one of the things that was referenced in the story. And again, this is not coming from the libs here. The main news outlets that's doing the reporting on this has been the New York Post, which is Rupert Murdoch, and the inspector general is a staunch Trump supporting Republican, which tells me that she's gone because, you know, she's not being targeted by the libs. She's being targeted by her own people, which tells me that probably, you know, she's one of the worst cabinet officials he has. And he's probably looking for a reason to get rid of her. And now they're going to give him a very good reason. So my guess would be she's probably got about a month left before she's gone.
Okay. Well, she could always get promoted. You never know. She might be the cabinet. She might be chief of staff in the next. You know,
speaking of along these same lines, Kim Guilfoyle, I keep checking the Greek press to find out. You know, she's our ambassador to Greece now. I keep checking their press to find out if she's embarrassing us. But apparently, she's like a major hit over there. Like she's the life. Yeah, they love her. They love her in Greece. They love her. She's apparently like invited to all the big parties and putting on a show. Right. And, you know, it's actually probably a pretty good job for her.
It was always her destiny, maybe, you know. Okay, listen, we have to finish, but very interesting today. And we shall watch this space, obviously, especially when it comes to Greenland, which will be an evolving story. Don't forget to download the audio podcast. That drops later tonight. Check out our sponsors in the description below. And join us next Wednesday for another Uncovered. Thanks a lot, Ron.
All right. See you next week, everyone.